They like this idea of the man who had potential but is now broken by life. He had some toxic masculinity. Now he's had to learn how to be softer. I fundamentally disagree with that view.
Welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. Today,
we're joined by Michael LeBlanc, a decorated Marine Corps veteran, successful tech founder, and author of If Anger is the Answer.
He specializes in tactical psychology, helping men transform raw aggression into elite leadership, purpose, and real-world dominance.
The Greeks had three parts. They separated anger into a third part. Now, we would think of anger, same as lust. Get it out of your life and let rationality rule. The Greeks didn't think that. Anger is the only emotion that men are allowed to feel. It's actually the first step toward having a full, rich human experience, is to feel the one emotion that you're allowed to feel. A lot of people are wondering why so many men are committing suicide now, why they're having their college rates drop, their working rates drop. It's no surprise at all. If you tell them to tie one hand behind their back, which is their anger, they have their anger and rationality that they can build with. And we say, just use rationality. That's a tough fight to win.
Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and I'm here with a great guest, Mike LeBlanc. He is writing a book that's coming out, maybe out by the time this episode is live, but it's called What If Anger is the Answer? And I'm really excited about this topic because we talk about this on the show a lot, where we don't often talk about, my industry doesn't really talk about like dark psychology, right? It kind of pathologizes anger. It tries to make everything like just calm and smooth and peaceful and fake, frankly. But if you go back in psychology, I know you pull a lot from philosophy in your book, men are talking about anger, aggression, dominance, control, power, right? I mean, these are critical issues that we need to be speaking about rather than just trying to put this wet blanket over it. So Mike, I'm really happy to have you on the show to dig into your expertise.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark. Appreciate it.
So let's just start with a little bit about you. What inspired you to write this book? I know you were a Marine, you're a veteran. So what made that transition from, working in the armed forces to then, founding a couple startups to now writing this book? Give us kind of like the overview of your bio.
My wife always says that everything is equally difficult for me. Like picking out the brand of toothpaste to like figuring out a new marketing strategy, like everything's just hard for me. And the past 20 years, I just turned 40, but kind of those past 20 years since college, I've just had to go through everything. I think very stupid things, and then it takes me a long time to learn why they're wrong. And the biggest one of those was really surrounding anger. So I came across this idea when I was studying the Greeks. I translated ancient Greek in college, right? And you get to these new frameworks where anger, dominance, power are not negative words in themselves. The excess of them is negative, but being deficient in them is negative as well. And, I went to the perfect place, the Marine Corps, that does a great job of taking young, angry men and turning them into commanders and leaders. And so over the course of that, I really learned stuff that I started writing it down for my kids. It started as a file called Tips on Life for the Kids. And that really grew into going, no, I want to put this out there. This is something I want to talk about. This is something that I think could be helpful to people.
So that's an incredible story. I want to really dive into certain parts of that, but let's start with, because maybe a question, a hook, right? It's like, what do you think is misunderstood about anger, especially when it comes to men? Well, where do you think we are as a culture right now around these types of conversations?
So I think that most modern psychology splits the soul into two parts. And you see them in like Looney Tunes or something, right? There's an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. And we all have that kind of debate that goes on in our head, right? The angel's like, probably time to call it quits. Let's get some sleep tonight. And the devil's like, hey, Vegas is open all hours, right? Let's go out. Let's go out and rage. That's a debate that a lot of us feel. The Greeks had three parts. So they had the angelic point, which was, to them, the mind. And that was the rational one that was saying, like, this is probably what's best for us. They had the devilish part, which was the appetites. And that's telling you, lust, greed, all these things that we're driven to do. But they separated anger into a third part. Now, we would very much think of anger as, the same thing as lust, right? You're like, put those in the same category. They both just need to be, this wet blanket. I like that image of just a wet blanket just thrown on top of it, get it out of your life and let rationality rule. The Greeks didn't think that. And they thought that drive, ambition, command really came from that third part, anger, and kind of a mix specifically of anger and rationality, the mind working together with this anger part. And that that to me really opened up this kind of mystery that I was trying to solve over the years of why didn't they just say that it was another emotion? Right? Why and what the hell am I supposed to do with it if that is the case? And so I think that's a big thing that we're missing today is a lot of people go, especially, angry young men, oh, I've got to stop this. The world doesn't like this. You feel like a bull in a china shop. Everything feels like an overreaction. But, the Greeks would say, no, you're at the start of something great. You're just not doing anything with it.
Yeah, 100%. It makes me think of I think it's Roman. I think it's Latin. They talk about cultivating virtus. Are you familiar with that concept? Yeah. Which for young men, it's like gaminess, or it's like competition, or it's like initiation. Is maybe a good way to talk about it, right? But it's like the idea of like the young man that volunteers for stuff, right, and like throws himself in there. And what they talk about is if you do enough virtus, right, when you get older, you get to cultivate gravitas. Like that leads to like a weightiness to your words, right, and a weightiness to your being, where you don't have to be the same kind of like pit dog fighting, but because you were that pit dog, now people listen to you. Right? People actually respect what you have to say.
And I think that's like, a lot of people don't look at this when they try to think, how am I going to get myself under control? Right? We've all experienced that, feeling out of control. And, honestly, I mean, you put this into ChatGPT. I do this sometimes just for fun, just to see what AI says. Take a bubble bath, take deep breaths, work on your breathing, wake up at 4 a.m. Whatever these things are that it wants you to do. There's a place for that, but there's also a place for saying, go out and compete. Go compete at something. What are you competing at right now that you could be doing better, that you could be doing to win? And I think that people stray from that in thinking that that's something that's going to help them. But, sports, games, and just the competition of business, whatever business you're in, those to me they're psychological forces. They're psychological regulators. And to me, that's many of the times that I have gone to, breathing exercises, I should have actually been going to a list and like actually knocking these things out there. And I think it's just something that we're getting wrong during our age. Everybody's you're never going to be right on the mean. But that's one of the things that I'm trying to push back on is going, you got to remember that, like, dominance, when you win a competition, you feel 10 feet tall, and you can use that for good, right? There's good that can come from that can come from winning. And there's good that can come from, competing well and losing.
Yeah. I think I have to apologize on behalf of my industry, but I think that the therapy industry really coined that, right? This idea of self-care, being that bubble bath, being that massage, being like, take a break, like just give yourself a day off, right? Which again, like there's a time and a place, but I find for men in general, our self-care is like, go do a long hike, go climb a mountain, go to the gym, right? Like go join a, mixed martial arts, dojo, right? It's like, we need to channel that aggression, not just try to tamp it down constantly.
My wife understands this very well about me. Right. And she, she's always, when I'm just antsy or stressed or however I'm acting, she'll be like, you need to go jump in the ocean right now. Like, go swim in the ocean. Or she's like, you need to go for a run. You need to go work out. Whatever those things are, because she knows from, 10 plus years marriage that I just need that physical regulation. And it's more than physical. It's more than physical. I don't mean to be reductive about it. I mean, there's something spiritual that happens from a state change. JFK was very big on this, of state changes. He thought that, like going sailing was something that like fixed his constitution and brought him back to be able to make better decisions. I think that's absolutely the case. It's something that people love about cold plunges these days. I think that's one of the reasons that's taken off so much. But those are the kind of manly pushes that you need if you're going to get your emotions regulated and get back on track.
And the research backs that up. I mean, there's a growing body of research around like unconscious thought, right, and unconscious processing and unconscious problem solving. And it's like, yeah, when you're in a flow state, no matter what that is, right, your mind is solving your life problems in your background. And then you have these kind of like insights, this like flash of brilliance. And it didn't come from nowhere, right? It's because you change the state of your mind, right? So you're not like using your conscious mind. You're letting the more right hemisphere, right? You're using more of like your dreamlike self to come with creative solutions to what's ailing you. So I'm curious for you, like, when did it go wrong? Like how did this change? Because I pull from a lot of ancient cultures, a lot of mythology, philosophy. It looks like you do as well, but the culture has just shifted so much since then, where we have to go back almost like thousands of years to find good examples of men talking about anger and aggression in a really constructive and nuanced way.
I think it's really interesting if you look through the 50s, right? People go back to the 50s as if that's the way that things always were. That was the traditional way. And then there's kind of this big response to it that comes throughout the 60s and 70s. But really, what was going on in the 50s, that was a very peculiar time in American history and in world history, right? Before then, people don't think about these things much, but the 5-day work week, that was kind of birthed in the 40s, 50s, right? Before then, it was mostly farms. You were mostly working on farms. Men and women both mostly worked leading up to that era. There were certain civilizations where they pop out and they didn't, but women working has always been a thing. That's kind of how you need to survive, right? It's very recent that we had a woman that would like stay at home. That was pretty new. There were just a lot of times about that era, and I think that the 60s really responded to that. Just had this huge reaction because you did have something that was so extreme about the way that things were being set in the 50s, what the nuclear family looked like. They were introduced to the concept of nuclear war and kind of an existential threat. And then also just so many backroom dealings in politics, right? So you have all of a sudden these wild emotions that are against these things, and these very emotional things like going to Vietnam, right? And that sort of unlocks not only this, this kind of wild reaction of people burning flags and Woodstock and things, but also everybody that's studying psychology at the time. New ideas start to get noticed, new funding starts to go behind research, and you see this big push toward let's not let these emotions, these childish emotions, lead us in global politics. Let's not let childish emotions lead our lives. And so I think it came from somewhere, that I'm very sympathetic to. But like most things, the pendulum never stops in the middle. We've just seen that year over year start to transform this. And one of the funniest places to watch this is dads in TV shows. Right. So if you look back to Leave It to Beaver, show that I watched a lot while I was growing up, the Brady Bunch, right? When you're looking back at those, the basic idea of the episode is the kids are going to mess things up. They're going to come back and they're going to go to the dad, and the dad's going to say, here's why it was wrong. You start to see, in the, TGIF era, the Full House, Family Matters, right? These ones, you still have that parent that's in control. The dad is still somebody that's looked to, but it's a dad who starts to admit that he has some problems too. And a lot of those are, saying to the kids like, I messed that one up, honey. I did this and that, and that birthed a new kind of man. You watch that as that's transformed. It has gone into, to watch Disney today, parents are very often written out of shows. iCarly is a major show. My daughter watched it on a road trip, and so I got to watch this. Carly has no parents, just none.
Really? There's
and they
none
don't
in the house in the sitcom.
They finally, I looked it up because I was curious. In the last season, they bring back her dad, and they say that he was deployed in war the whole time for these like 8 seasons. The mom is never spoken of, right? There are just no parents, and when they do put parents into these shows, they're goofy ones. They hire improv comics to do it. And the whole idea is the parents have no idea what's going on. The kid knows best. And you even see it in adult TV today. You'll watch shows like Ted Lasso, Bad Monkey, this whole kind of Rooster is the new Steve Carell one. Friends and Neighbors, they like this idea of the man who had potential but is now broken by life. And they're showing what the solution to that is. Look, this guy was beat because he had some toxic masculinity. Now he's had to learn how to be softer on everyone else. He's had to learn that it is about the bubble baths, the breathing, and forgiving. And I think that is, that's a real sign of where our culture is at with these things, that they're thinking those are the men that you want to be. They want a man who was, looked like he had the potential to be strong, but now he's found a new kind of strength. And, I fundamentally disagree with that view.
I think we're losing a lot, and I think for a lot of men, especially young boys, there's this element that I talk about with my clients of honesty that comes with anger, For a lot of guys, like that's the most honest and real, and I would even go as far as say alive that a lot of guys feel. And then I think our culture immediately squashes that, right? Like when a guy gets angry, whether he's going to cause violence or not, right? I mean, and most guys do not cause violence, frankly, right? But whether that's even on the table, I think it gets dismissed immediately, right? It gets squashed down. People are like, oh, well, you just got angry, so your opinion doesn't matter, right? Like the moment you lose your shit, especially as a young man, you're done, right? You're kicked out of the social circle. Your girlfriend breaks up with you, right? You get kicked out of class or whatever it is, right? Like it is completely dismissed. And we're being, really trained and conditioned to speak in a different way or express ourselves in ways that I think are from a biological level and a hormonal level, like really unnatural, and really confusing to young men.
I was talking to a therapist, who's a friend of my wife's, and when he heard the title of my book, "What If Anger's the Answer," he was like, "Oh, that's brilliant." And I said, "Oh, nobody said that, right?" I was like, "They've said it's provocative," but I said, "Why?" And he said because anger is the only emotion that men are allowed to feel. He says, so that's why sadness shows as anger, grief shows as anger. All of these things need to come out in anger, but he goes, it's actually the first step toward having a full, rich human experience is to feel the one emotion that you're allowed to feel. and I thought, yeah, there is something to that, because like you're saying, as soon as you get angry, you're discounted, right? The best way to win an argument is to be the calm one. And to just, sit there and go like, well, I can see that you're very upset about this, but here are the facts. It's a great way to win an argument, even if you're completely wrong. But really, getting in touch with that anger and being able to use it in the right way it's a critical life skill, especially if you want to build a life. A lot of people are wondering why so many men are committing suicide now, why they're having we're seeing their college rates drop. We're seeing, their working rates drop. It's no surprise at all. If you tell them to, tie one hand behind their back, which is their anger, right? They have their anger and rationality that they can build with. And we say, just use rationality. That's a tough fight to win.
I'm curious what you think about this idea. I talk about it, with my clients on the show, but the idea of, to your point, like honoring that as a step, right? As anger as a step. Obviously the goal is not to be angry all the time, right? But I do think it's a critical step, especially for life. And you mentioned, guys that are, depressed, right? Or that are suicidal. And what I see time and time again with those men that I work with is that they got to get angry first. And again, I think ministry fucks up because, we say like, oh, practice gratitude, or like, be happy for what you have and really learn to be mindful and notice the present moment and all this stuff. And like, again, those are good aspirational values. But when you're like fucking in the mud, the only thing that can really get through depression is anger. So I try to encourage my guys to like, get pissed. What are you pissed at? Again, maybe you're pissed at the government. Maybe you're pissed at your family. Maybe you're pissed at your job. Maybe you're pissed at something. At least it's mobilizing. But you don't need to stay there, right? You're not going to become pissed forever. But I do think you need that kind of like rocket booster, right? To like leave the atmosphere before you can transition to something that's maybe more sustainable, right? Or better for the environment or whatever metaphor you want to use there. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
That's what we really see is that when people are just angry, at nothing, that just shows as this kind of stress and anxiety. But anger at something, you often should be angry, right? There are real things to be angry about. And we live, I think about taxes all the time, right? I have my uncle always says, if instead of, a company withholding taxes and then you getting your return, at the end of the year, if you had to you got paid cash and you had to go every year and go pay in person and give them all the cash, he was like, we'd have a revolution the first day. And yeah. I think that's absolutely right. There is
business owner, I can relate with that because I have to do that. Right.
Yes. Yeah. Right. And there's so much to be angry about in taxes. And when you see those dollars being misspent and when you see what they're spent on, those are things that should make a reasonable person angry. But we all just go, nothing's as certain in life as death and taxes. Like everybody just tells you, suck it up. Right. Don't dig into that. Don't look into that. You just need to get over it. And, meanwhile, taxes have been around for about 100 years. We've done income tax. It's a very new thing that we're doing in the United States even. When we look at colleges, it's like, get up off your ass, go to college. College, again, about 100 years, with very low rates of people doing that. Before then, if you go back to the founders, they were like lawyers when they were 17, right? That was It was a different.
Yeah, Mitch read a bunch of books, right? Called it good. I guess that was it, right?
The way that we've put these things though is we go, just accept there's been taxes forever. There is persistent as death. Just, when you look at college has always been around for the rich, and now we've opened it to everybody. No, it just hasn't. That's simply untrue. And so a lot of these things that are really relatively new historically, we're supposed to erase thousands of years of evolution and human practices and just suddenly say, I'm going to wake up and do it different. That's not a sustainable path on these things. So I am, whatever these people are getting angry at, you look like a conspiracy theorist if you want to go out and yell about taxes. People think you're, Wesley Snipes, you're crazy. But, if you actually look at this stuff and think about it, you're like, why are they taking my money to go do that? Why are they doing this in a foreign war? Why are they doing this with these programs? Why? That's my money. I want it for the roads, right? That's the easy one we can all get together with. But I think that is why it's a necessary step to get people angry, because it means there's an honesty to it. You're actually looking at things as they are and coming in where you're at.
Yeah, and you're letting stuff like touch you, right? Again, because I think so many men are numb, right? And then like the first thing they feel is rage, which again, it's something like actually impacting you. You actually have a belief about that. You got an opinion. You have an emotional reaction. Okay, that means that thing's meaningful to you in some way, shape, or form, right? Like it's actually hitting something in your soul that's getting you fired up. So I want to ask you, because I think you're talking about at least two different types of anger. Maybe there's the developmental part, right? There's like this kind of anger that is more wild. The way I talk about with my guys is the idea of like the barbarian, right? That you're just like hacking away at an axe, right? And you like, you get it done, but there's a lot of blood and a lot of collateral damage and a lot of, danger in that. And then there's like one that you're talking about, which is a more refined version. And when I talk to my guys about it, I say it's like the samurai, right? That's like one cut, right? That's like one cut is graceful, right? You still get the job done. You're still an incredible warrior, but it's super efficient and elegant. So I'm curious, like there's the distinction you make between those two different kinds, what language you use to describe that, and what that developmental process looks like to really become an elegant user of anger.
This is very much the arc that I went on in my life, right? When I joined the Marine Corps, I don't come from a military family. First time I shot a gun was on the rifle range in the Marine Corps, right? I'm just not from that kind of thing. But I had this kind of me against the world anger. And I wasn't an angry guy. Anybody that would talk to me would be like, Mike was a perfectly nice guy, right? But it was something deep inside that was like, I'm angry. I should be doing better. Everything around me should be harder. I was getting a lot of people that were going, here's the smart way, back then, everybody was like, oh, go buy houses, go buy rental properties, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you're being told, that you're like, that will make you smart, and compound interest is the way that you're going to grow. And there was this other part of me that was like, I'm young, I'm strong, I should be doing something harder. And, I didn't even know that there was a war going on at the time, right? I literally had to go and buy a paper to see, because I was like, I think there's a war in Iraq.
There's something going on over there.
I had to like go look it up, and I was like, there is. And at the time I knew so little about it that I went, are these people shooting? Like, are there still people that kill people, or is it all machines now? I just didn't know. And, so I started in on this kind of, research about this. And then I couldn't break this feeling of like, why not me? Why do all these other people go, and why not me? That didn't make a lot of sense. And people would go, oh, this and that. But I kind of went, I don't see it. And I had this sort of shame about it. And this sort of like, I also I want something hard. I loved, what the Marine Corps was putting out was the greatest marketing in the world for a guy like me, because they're like, you're going to work without sleep. You're going to work without food. You're going to lead troops in, the scariest places on earth, and you're not going to know where we put you. To me, that was like, that's what I'm looking for. And so I kind of went into everything with this sense of, I'm going to dominate. I'm going to go into the Marine Corps. I'm going to outdo everybody else. I will be the fastest, the strongest, the smartest. And, as I started going through Marine training, that me against the world started to get transformed. And in a very good way that I think a lot of athletes feel the same thing. It's you start to feel your team and your allies, and you start going, this guy's like me, and that guy's definitely not like me. I hate this guy, but I love this guy. And you start developing this kind of, you're a crew within a crew, right? And you start going, all right, I've got some spirit there. And, so you start now, I think that you're demanding the most out of your team, demanding the most out of yourself to set the example. And you're trying to inflict that on anybody you think stands against you. And, those are very, very exciting years. And that's kind of a transformation of that anger. But then in anything, and I see this across the board, is like in the Marine Corps, then I went to Afghanistan. I was a partner to the Afghan National Army. I was a partner to a bunch of 3-letter agencies, a bunch of military contractors. Your team that you had that you felt was so tight, and maybe you had some internal dynamics, but it was still tight. Now you're in with weird people. They speak different languages. They don't care about the same things. People aren't after the same thing. And, I see this same development go from, young people going into law firms, competitive law firms. They're like, I'm going to outdo everybody. Then they're like, no, these are my people. I've found my team within the law firm. Then they start going, I'm the best law firm there is. Then they start dealing with accountants and other counsel and it just gets sort of murky. And, I turned very cynical when that happened. And you just start to go, okay, all those team dynamics, it was all kind of very high school and childlike. And you go, this is the real world. And now I'm realistic. And there's a lot that's right about that. But I think there's another step still where you still have to bring that part of you that goes, this isn't what it should be. The world's not what it should be. So what am I going to do about it? And that's where I think you start to see much more samurai anger, right? You start to see there are places for this. There are places for me to bring this part of myself, that it's not just surrender, right? The Ted Lasso version of the world is surrender and hope. Just give it all up. There's nothing you can do. And who knows, maybe by some chance you could do a little good. No, there's agency in the world, right? There's a lot you can still do. And a lot of that is you just need a kind of grounded idealism. You're not the same 19-year-old that set out on the journey that goes, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to be the big impact. But you go, there's plenty to be done here. And that transformation for me has been what got me out of the Marine Corps and got me into Harvard, what got me to start and sell my first company, what got me to start my company now. I mean, there's so much that you can build once you kind of step out of that cynicism and resentment that anger naturally leads to.
So let's just zoom in on that, because I think that is a hugely important topic. I talk to a lot of men, and I was gonna say young men, but really a lot of men. There's a lot of cynical men. There's a lot of like critics, right? I think there's a lot of guys that they call it like, fear of commitment, right? Or they want like an easy life. And I'm in line with you, man. I think as men, especially, we can take responsibility for our corner of the world, because if we don't, then it's gonna go to shit. If you just, are just completely afraid of committing to things, afraid of making decisions, afraid of changing your environment, like, yeah, it's gonna default into just like the heat death of your life, right? Like you're just the communities are gonna degrade. So how do you inspire that? How do you nurture that in guys? Because I feel like there's an epidemic of like this kind of Peter Pan syndrome, right? Always wanting to be a young boy forever, always wanted to be a kid forever, and not just kind of frankly manning up and changing shit, like using your power in a good way.
I think that largely comes from schools. My kids all know they're 7, 8, and 9 years old. At age 13, they get to choose if they're going to stay in school or if they're going to come and work for me, work for a friend, or start a business. And, to me, I am not a believer in school, right? I'm a Harvard graduate. I'm not a believer in school. I think that what schools do is they constantly set up these new fake criteria for us to reach. They set up tests and things that don't actually correspond to reality. The best tests in the world, shooting a basketball is a great test because you either make it or you don't. And it doesn't matter why you made it or you didn't, right? There's nobody standing there going, well, you kept your elbow in. I know the ball didn't go in, but you did great. No, get the ball in the hoop. That's the task. And I think that we have had schools now. It's been this push. Everybody's going to go to college. Okay. Then people are like, well, I still need to be elite. So I need to get a master's and I need to get a PhD. And so we have this kind of perpetual childhood that has started with the elites of they're not going to get their hands dirty for as long as possible. And by the time they hit the workforce where they would recognize some reality, they're either with a company that is so massive like Google that it is not subject to reality. You can put them in moonshot projects that have nothing to do with, reality. Or they're just being put in these kind of big corporate positions. And that's where we see leaders consistently stepping up who have not done hands-on work of any kind. And so to me, you see a lot of guys that they've kind of fallen off track with that competition, usually because they've seen through it, right? And they look at the competition, they go, I don't like what you guys are all competing for. I don't want to play the game. So I'm taking my ball and going home. I think that's a lot of what we see in guys. That was certainly a big impulse for me. I was not going to go to college. I got convinced at the last minute to go to college. And it was only because my college read the actual texts and you learned ancient Greek. And those, to me, I thought, that sounds good. There were no tests at my school. There were no textbooks. And that's what I needed freedom from at that time. That was the only school that I applied to. But I think a lot of guys are seeing through the game, but not knowing what to do next, because they just go, all right, I obviously can't compete in the success realm anymore. That's not my ladder. So I'm just out of the whole thing.
Yeah, I think they're seeing through it. They're becoming cynical. They're becoming critics. But then I think our culture like rewards that more so, right? They can start posting online. They can start making their YouTube channel. They can start getting their critique out there. But I think deep down, to your point about joining the Marines, which, I would frame that as kind of like initiation, right? Going from boy to man, they know they're uninitiated. They know they can't actually do anything because they haven't done anything. They haven't tried to do anything, and they haven't had good mentors or teachers to teach them how to do real shit.
For me, that was earning my spurs, was becoming a Marine. When I got that title, United States Marine, that was earning my spurs. Did you have a similar process that you went through where you started to feel like I went from boy to man?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's more, I think, complicated because I didn't have something like the Marines. I think I would have done well, actually, something like that, or working in a trade more so, right? Where I think a lot of guys get that. For me, it was my recovery process, kind of overcoming addiction and changing fundamentally as a human, and then needing to build a life, right? So not just being this addict, being this party guy, right? But actually building a life. And that meant looking at a lot of stuff in the mirror, like looking at my physical health in the mirror, for instance, right? Trying to go after things that I enjoyed. So, we talked before a show, I'm in Colorado. So if it was a lot of like mountaineering trips and a lot of backcountry backpacking trips and stuff that I didn't think I was capable of doing, like major solo camping summits and shit like that, right? That I was scared of, but it was like actively doing things that I was scared of to become someone who I was proud of ultimately. And then I think one that I'd love to chat with you about, because you're also a business owner, startup, is I think being an entrepreneur is, I think, the closest our culture, our American culture, Western culture at least, has to like the old initiation rituals, right? To like going out alone with a stick to kill a jaguar or whatever, right? It's like I think there is something about the capitalist system and like battling, especially as like a solo entrepreneur or a startup, that you have to look at yourself and you have to grow up, or else you just fail. Right. You can't procrastinate. You can't like lie. You can't like be a charlatan. Like at some point, all that shit falls through. You have to like dial in every part of your life to actually make it work.
It's so interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting that you talk about addiction and that too, because very fundamental for me, when I was 14 years old, my cousin, who was a little bit older, was addicted to heroin, and she started going through rehab, and she was like a sister to me. We were very close with our cousins. We saw them all the time, multiple times a week. And for me at 14, which is an age where kids are starting to experiment with drugs and stuff, this, I'd be visiting her in rehab during those days, and then going back to high school parties and going, you guys are out of your minds. I was like, this is the craziest path. But I did see, through her, I got so inspired, because she got broken down so much to rock bottom. I mean, everything taken. She can't go near her friends anymore. She can't have any of her habits anymore. She can't, that drugs are obviously a major reliever of stress. And, it's an escape. She loses all of that, right? And damn near dies in the process. But you saw this kind of rebirth happening in her as she started to, she fought against every step in AA, right? The whole way up the ladder, fought every one of them, but she would come to make them her own through the process. And I can remember I used to visit her in rehab every day. And it was when I first got my license, I did that. So when I was 16, she'd be in rehabs too. And I'd go and visit her every day. And I would go driving home and I'd think, she's working so much harder on her soul than I am. I don't know if I would have put it like that back then, But I thought she's so much more serious than I am. And I thought, here people look at her as, oh, addict. She lost her place in society, has to try to get back up to where the rest of us are. And I was looking at the slope of her growth and going, why don't I have that? Like, what? I need something terrible to happen to me to spurt that kind of growth. And I think that became a major driving factor in my life, was me thinking this idea of what if I treat my state right now as if it's rock bottom? What if I treat this as if I am addicted to plenty? What if I actually push myself to become this, higher level of myself? And I think it's something that when you do that over the course of years, people see it in getting back on track after addiction. But man, you can see that from any place that you are when you work those things. I mean, it's incredible what you can turn your life into.
Yeah, that's a powerful story. And yeah, like it's not getting your life back on track. It's like building a new track, because I think addiction, at least for me, and I don't know, your cousin obviously, but for me, that was my cynical phase, right? Like my addiction on the surface looked like I was just fucking off and partying and trying to get laid, and I was in the rave scene. No, dude, it looks fun, but internally it was like a slow suicide, right? It was me doing exactly what you talked about, like looking at society, looking at older men, looking at the economy, being like, I don't know where I fit in, so I'm just gonna like do this. I'm gonna do this for a while and just like blow out my dopamine receptors and just create a false reality. And sobriety is like as honest as you can get, because you're removing all of those pollutants, right? You're removing that glasses and that lens that kind of corrupt reality, and you have to deal with it. I mean, you have to deal with it, or else you fail, right? Or else you ultimately die or commit suicide or something.
There's a great comic that I love, cartoon, and it's cavemen. I can never find this comic. I've gone looking for it. But in the first panel, it's a guy that's messing with some sticks, and everybody else is kind of away. And in the second one, he suddenly, sees fire. And so people kind of take notice. All of a sudden, everybody's surrounding him, and everybody's surrounding this fire in awe of what he's done. And there's one guy that's standing off, kind of looking at him. And then, the next panel, that guy who was looking off at it, he comes and he pees on the fire and he puts it out. And then the last panel is him walking away and all the people following him. And to me, that captures something that is so fundamental in human beings, that the two big ways to find recognition is the biggest thing that we seek. And the two easiest ways to get it is either achievement or destruction. And destruction is a hell of a lot easier than achievement. Right. And so I think that's what we see a lot of people going in the rave scene, people going and, chasing this kind of pleasure lifestyle. A lot of it is because there's a recognition that comes with it, where everybody else is looking at you and going, oh, how do you go so hard? Oh, man, your life must be so great. Oh, man. I mean, there's a lot that comes with being the bad boy in a lot of ways. And it's very hard to start seeing, where can I be the man, especially if it is, again, in schools. And it's like, well, what am I going to go ace this test? Does that really give me the kind of recognition that I'm looking for? No. And so, I mean, it's Lincoln talks about this in the Boys Lyceum speech, famous speech he gave long before he was president. But he talks about how there will always be great men who are born, and when they're born to times of crisis, they're going to try to bring order. And when they are born to times of order, they're going to bring destruction. And that is what we are living through right now, is I think a lot of men that they see, their best path to getting recognition is to just screw off, to do something that's so bad, to use drugs, to get involved in something dangerous, because danger is exciting. It just is. It gets recognition because someone else goes, I couldn't do that. I don't know how you do that.
So I guess I kind of asked the question before, but I'm just really curious, like your thoughts, like how do you fix this, man? like what needs to change, whether that's on an individual level, maybe a family leadership level, maybe a policy level, right? But like, how do we reverse course here? Or is it maybe the question you pose, like, does it have to get worse, right? Do we as a society, or we as men, need to hit a collective rock bottom before we start, changing course?
I think that part of it is understanding, and part of it is action, right? And so the understanding part, that's why I think it's very good to have discussions like this, to read books like this, because you need to recognize that you're not crazy, right? That's the first step. Is the world will tell you you're crazy at every single point, especially, and this as an entrepreneur, everybody always thinks you're nuts for what you want to do. They go, if that was a good idea, somebody else would have done it. I'm like, no, I'm the someone else. That's what you don't get. Right. But there is an understanding that needs to go on that you go, yeah, okay, this is a real thing. And, my second is always put the bar on the floor. There's a funny thing that goes on in weightlifting. It's a great example, right? Or for me, pull-ups. This was a big one in pull-ups. I had to be able to do 20 dead hang pull-ups for the Marine Corps. I would say that I could do pull-ups, and I was always like, oh, I'll be good on pull-ups. But when I actually got on that bar, I was using my body weight so much, and they were little half ones. I mean, everybody knows this. You watch a guy get on the bar, and he's like, oh, I can do 50 pull-ups. And then he's going 3 inches, and you're like, what are you doing? Like, that's not the exercise. The first thing is start, at least in your own head, stop lying to yourself and start going, this is the weight that I can actually handle. This is how many pull-ups I can actually do. And maybe I need a band to help me, or maybe I need to put my foot up on a chair to do it. But, for me, that always involves writing it down. I'm maniacal about writing down workouts. I love to write, what did I do that day? What was my output? What was the heaviest that I could lift that day? What was the most reps that I could do? What exactly happened before and after? I love that kind of thing, because when you get facts like that, right, it's amazing how quickly you can grow, because you stop going, oh no, I can, yeah, of course I can bicep curl 50s. It's like, do what you can actually do. And I think that goes across your life, but I think weightlifting is a great place to start. But in anything, it's amazing once you start going, that's what I actually did. On sales calls, I do a bunch of sales stuff. Do you actually follow up all the time on these things? Everybody's always like, I'm all over it. I don't know, that deal fell through. Did you do something about it every day? Did you look at it? Did you think about it? Did you do just basic homework? And did you have a way of holding yourself accountable for that? Those things, to me, that's what really gets you put on track, where you just start to see that consistency, and consistency always grows. And so everybody else will, still come and look at you and go, oh my gosh, you're only lifting that. Come on, that's so low. I can't believe that's what you're benching. And so there's like an embarrassment to it, and there's all this kind of stuff, but you don't worry about that, because your body's going to reflect reality. Your performance is going to reflect reality. Your bank account's going to reflect reality. They don't reflect what people are saying. Right?
The people that are saying that are not lifting. I think if you go to like a decent gym, right? Like I do CrossFit, right? It's a kind of a good example, right? Like, it's competitive, but it's also unbelievably cooperative and supportive, right? And people that have done it, they know, right? As long as you're not like an asshole, right? As long as you're not like in their way, even if they're like the alpha of the gym, like they were at your spot at one point, and like, I think it's the thing that I like to, talk about with my guys is like, so many men are afraid of this hierarchy, right? They don't like being at the bottom of the hierarchy. They don't like, being able to, only bench the bar or whatever. But like, if you're with a good group of guys, not only if you're honest with a good group of guys, they will not only accept you, but they will help you grow. And like, that's that kind of like fraternal experience that I think a lot of guys don't experience in life, right? They don't go to things that are competitive, right? They don't go to things that have a ranking system. And then you end up just being alone and isolated, and you don't feel like you belong anywhere.
Well, and I'm a huge believer in this. My grandpa used to always say, play with a dirty stick and you're going to get dirty. And that was, passed to my dad, that was passed to me, that was passed to my son. That's 4 generations strong in the LeBlancs. But we are very big on this idea of, if you put yourself around negative people, if you put yourself around whatever kind of person, you will become like those people. You are, there's a saying of, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. That is absolutely true. And for me, I don't just use that as, okay, I need to avoid certain people in my life, although I do always think of that. But I also think, who do I need at this time in my life? Who do I want to be more like? When I've gone through harder times in my marriage, I try to start hanging out with people that I think are good husbands. That's I just friends that I have that I go, I like what they got going. I'll just set up phone calls with them. A bunch of these guys know, and they know that I'll call them and I'll be like, hey, I need some of your good husband to rub off on me. But, whatever it is, if you want to be an entrepreneur, who else is starting businesses? If you want to be a weightlifter, who's in shape? They are doing all kinds of small things that you have no idea about, but they're going to have such an effect on who you are. I had this, one of the guys this guy that I grew up with, he was real bad kid. And it was so funny to me. We were getting older. I'd come back from college and was talking to him with a bunch of guys that we used to hang out with. He had gotten a job at a movie theater, and his job was to sweep up the theaters. Okay. So he's doing that, and he tells this story about, I just finished up this huge theater. I just swept the whole thing. And as soon as I walk out, my manager sees me in the hallway and he goes, "Oh, Wes, good to see you. Theater 7 needs to be cleaned up too." And he says, "Can you believe that?" I threw the broom at his feet and I said, "Clean it up your damn self." Now, that was a baffling story to me. And what was even more surprising was that all of our friends went, "Hell yeah, you told him. That's amazing." I thought, this guy, of course, if he does that and he hears all of his friends say, "You did the right thing. Look how cool you are." They recognize him for it. He's going to do it again, probably a little bit more dramatically next time. If he hung out with 6 of me, I was like, "But your job was to sweep, right? Why do you mind somebody telling you to go do your job again? Like, he was your manager. Isn't it his job to tell you to go sweep?" If he had 6 of those people around, he'd defend it in the moment, but the next time he's in a situation like that, he's not going to do it. And I think that's, people don't give enough weight and credit to that effect of what the people right around you are saying, because you're not just going to stand against the grain on everything. You're going to give in on all these small points, and that's how your judgment's formed.
Yeah, and I'm also hearing this idea. I think it's like perfectionism that I think a lot of young men suffer from, or this entitlement that they should be the top, like that sweeping is below him, even though that's what he got hired for, right? Like again, I think it's like learning humility in a lot of ways, and like being like, okay, so it's okay to have an entry level job. It's okay to work in the trades, or work manufacturing, work in agriculture. Like, these are not like lesser life paths. And it's like, you need to start somewhere. But I feel like so many guys are afraid to start because they're afraid to be at the bottom. And they think that they're just like, they're better than it, even though they've never done it. They have zero experience or zero data.
I've got a humanoid robotics company right now. Right. And I say this just to give some level of scale, because people go, who is this guy talking on this thing anyway? But in 24 months, we've gone from starting the company, ordering parts, deciding what we're going to do, to today having $170 million in revenue, right? Big jump in 24 months. My co-founder, who's an engineer, Sanket, it's very funny to me because people think about him as being so arrogant. They talk about it all the time, of arrogant and egotistical. But what's funny is he is the least egotistical person that I know. He is the only one that is willing to look at a robot that is not working for some reason and actually go, "What's wrong with it?" Not, "Oh, I know that this person built this part, so I'm not going to say it," or "We know from theory that this should work." He's the only person that I know that is able to really look with clarity and go, it doesn't matter what we thought. It doesn't matter what the idea was. It obviously doesn't work. We need a new path. Let's get a new hypothesis, test the hypothesis, and we'll see if that works. But it's amazing to me how humility and arrogance kind of are coupled like that. That in many ways, being humble in the real world does look arrogant, and it looks overbearing, and it looks like this person can never be wrong. It's usually because that person is right a lot of the time, and it's because they've fessed up to reality instead of just talking. And so I think that is like, that's the important thing to start bringing out. That's why I say put the bar on the floor, benching the bar. I love that, because it is like, start to just be the one that's looking at the facts. How much can my muscles actually lift? How much can I actually do? Did I actually do the right thing on this, or why did it fall through? What's the most obvious reason that would have been? And can I put something in small that's going to fix that? Is there some kind of consistency that I can build up? Is there some kind of practice? But those moments are transformative.
Yeah, it makes you think. I'm blanking on the Latin phrase, but Marcus Aurelius, right, translates to like, the soil doesn't lie, right? And he's talking about this, right? It's like, I think he's talking about gardening specifically, right? It's like, either you grow the plant or you don't, right? And there's no real, you can't like lie to yourself. But I do think, yeah, like either a culture lies to us, where we look at, a lot of stuff is marketing that just lies. I think a lot of men don't want to look at themselves in the mirror truly, or they don't have good men, like you said, around them that can hold them accountable. And or a lot of the jobs now are like amorphous, like they're kind of like email jobs. No one really knows what you do. No one knows what your impact is. It's just a big cloud. So you don't have those soil experiences. You don't really get your hands dirty and have like a true like succeed or fail case in your life.
And that's what's so amazing about the trades, right? My dad is a house painter for over 50 years. I worked with him for many years. That's what's amazing about the Marine Corps. That's what's amazing about sports. The soil doesn't lie. Like the facts are the facts. And when you live in that world, you quickly go from this magical world that you've created with your words about who you are to feeling like, man, I just dropped in status, I dropped in performance, ability, everything. But you can actually build from there. And I think that's the incredible thing is like just, getting your story straight is very hard because we tell everybody the story about, here's the best excuse of why things came out my way. We always do that. We villainize the other people that stopped us. We make monsters out of the obstacles that we ran into. There was no way to overcome them. It was necessary. But there is a real honesty that you have to get to of just going, what does that look like? And when I talk about that, it's just your point of like, what do you do with all this diagnosis? I write that. I sit down in Microsoft Word and I type these things out, right? I type in Microsoft Word all the time because it's just how I think. I need to get to that point where I go, all right, why didn't that deal go through? Or why was I so excited about this thing and then it didn't come to fruition? Instead of having sour grapes about it, right? What actually happened? And was it actually for the best? But it's amazing what can happen when you're actually writing honestly with yourself about these things. To see, is there a progression there? Is there something that I can actually take from this? And when you do that, day after day, it's incredible what you can build.
Well, so I wanted to ask you a question. It's a little bit of a pivot, but I think we've talked a lot about, this anger, this life force thing when it comes to business, right? Sports, masculine development. But I'm curious because I think also in your book, you talk about family, as it comes to a relationship, right? Working with females or, feminine energy, children. And I imagine the anger takes a different form. So I was curious, like how it moves in those more relational, more social, more softer settings.
I think this is the most important lesson for parents. It is okay to be angry at your kids. Your kids do lots of things that should make you angry. And somehow, I don't know, sometimes we just converge on these things where it starts to become the new way of parenting, even though nobody really says it. And I don't know how this has happened of the kid being in charge.
Yeah, or being the center, being the gravitational center of the family.
Yes, we've landed on this thing of like the kid, they need to be treated special. When they do something really obnoxious, we should just let them. And people, I watch parents do this all the time. They endure their child's annoyance as if it's a virtue. Like they look at that as patience and exercising a godlike saint patience. And I think, would you get your kid off the table? Get your kid to stop throwing Cheerios around the living room. Like that is not acceptable behavior. And the kid needs to learn. You're not doing any favors for the kid by doing that. Right. And it's a funny kind of cruel to be kind, framework, but it is, you look at this and, dogs are probably a clearer and easier example because people are so emotional about their kids. But, you want your dog to be accepted into the home. If your dog chews everything up, if your dog, pees and poops everywhere, if your dog is just, barking all over the place, you won't let the dog in the house. You're not going to want the dog around. You're not going to take the dog with you to places. You want your dog to be acceptable socially to humans. That's going to give the dog the best life. Kids are exactly the same. And so, to me, if you aren't feeling moments of acute anger toward your children, ways that chronic resentment shows itself is going to be so much more horrible, so much more cruel than anything that your acute anger would have. It is fine to, be fed up with your kid and to yell at your kid. It's fine to yell at your kid. It's fine to discipline your kid. What is not fine is hating your kid for something and they have no idea why it is that you don't like them and why nobody else likes them.
Yeah, I tend to think of what we've been talking about, this like line between anger and violence, and I think so many people are so afraid of anger because they think it's always going to lead to violence. And like you're saying, like, don't be violent towards your kid. Don't be sadistic towards your kid. Don't be, emotionally violent. Like resentment would be emotional violence, right? But like you can be angry. You can discipline them. You can say no. I mean, you can set boundaries and rules and limits and punishments, right? Like it doesn't have to become violence. But I think we're we're so violent averse in modern parenting, and we're so afraid of abuse, and we're so afraid of like being the bad parent, the alcoholic dad, or whatever it is, that it just that whole spectrum of life is closed off.
It's so hard to be a judge because the kid is always doing things. It's not like there's one punishment that fits everything. And it's hard to think of punishments. It's hard to think of punishments. It's hard to decide how much they owe you and everything. I had my daughter the other night was at the neighbor's house, and they're supposed to come back to our house at 7:00. And I bought them all watches, right? She's 6. Bought them all watches, taught them how to tell the time. I was like, before that hits 7:00, you be back here. And she was not back. So I went to the neighbor's house and got her. So she was already going to be in trouble. And I look at, on her shirt, she's got 3 little Cheeto fingers. She's not supposed to be snacking. And I can see, him. I've got her caught her orange handed. Right. And so I'm just like, what are those? And she's like, I ate Cheetos, Dad. And she knows she's done something wrong. But to me, I'm like, look, she lost track of time. That's okay. And then, she ate Cheetos, but she did fess up to it right away. And being a 6-year-old, she easily could have, tried to just not say anything. There are lots of things that 6-year-olds do. But I liked both those. So I said, all right, you got to go to bed immediately. Just walk up to your room, go to bed. That's your punishment. Now, instead, she went up to her room and she turned off all the lights. They sleep with a light on. And she closed the door. Now, that's the next punishment that I usually give them. It's usually either you have to go directly to sleep or you have to go to sleep with no lights on and with the door closed. She gave herself a worse punishment. Now, in the morning, when she woke up, sorry, I'm going off the rails with this story. You're like, where's he going with this? She got up in the morning. She was in trouble again because I said, that is as bad as if you just stayed awake and I told you to go to sleep. I said, you didn't take my punishment as I gave it. I said, I knew that I could have done that. I chose not to give you that punishment. And you went ahead and did it anyway. And to me, that is like, that's the level of nuance that you have in disciplining your kids is you are making a decision about how much they should be punished. I don't want her pushing herself more and being worse to herself. I gave her the punishment, and I'm very clear with my kids. I'm like, once that punishment is done, we're both done with it. It's over. You do your time and we're all good. But it is like a lot of parenting, I think, is coming up with what are good punishments. We have a pool in the backyard, right? So swimming 10 laps is a very common punishment of mine. It's a life-changing thing to have that, because otherwise, what do you do when your kid does something egregious? Just get really upset, make them go think, sit on and stare with them and talk to them. Like, no, my kids are doing laps and they know it, right? It's like, suit on 20 laps right now. And then I stand out there while they do it. Sometimes I'll swim it with them, but it's like when you have those on hand, you don't have to get angry. A lot of anger is just frustration.
Yeah. Well, so, we're nearing the end of our show. I'm curious if somebody is inspired by the conversation. What's an action that they can take? I mean, you mentioned like, the kind of the after action reports, right? Writing things down, being honest. I think that's a great one. But I'm curious if there's another kind of tip or tactic or practice someone that can take on after the show.
My biggest thing, which I took from Jerry Seinfeld, has a great interview with Tim Ferriss where he talks about this. But he says you take a calendar, you print a calendar out, and I print mine on Microsoft Excel. I've been doing this for years. Choose some small action that you're going to do every day. And when you do it, I do 100 bicep curls each arm every day without putting the weights down. That's one thing that I do every day. When I do that, I earn a big fat Sharpie X across that day. When I do it the next day, you start to see a little bit of a chain. Don't break the chain. Just do it every single day. I think there's something about doing it, printing it and actually doing it by hand instead of putting it on a computer or something like that, that makes it real. You can't lie about, where your Sharpie is. You're like, I know that I either did it or didn't. That consistency, it produces miracles. So I had, quick story on this calendar thing. I had a deal. This was the first deal that we did at my new company, Foundation. So we had nothing. We had no revenue. We had no sales. And I'd had this really good proof of concept that we did with a customer of getting a robot out there. And it looked like it was going to be a big deal. And it was completely nowhere at this point. And it was because I just dropped the ball on it. I'd gotten distracted by other things. I stopped calling them. I stopped doing things for them. I stopped pushing it. And so I was like, all right, well, that deal's dead. And I had this calendar idea and I thought, you know what? I'm going to print out a calendar on this. So I printed one and I said, I'll do something for this deal every day. It may be 5 minutes. I might just text one of the guys in the company, right? And just send a funny GIF. That might be it for the day, but I earned my big X. I will do something every day. And I said, let me do this for a month and see if I get any traction on the deal. Within, and I'm not kidding you, 15 days of that moment, I had a contract for $14.8 million. A contract signed. I mean, it was incredible. $15 million in 15 days. I mean, that is so crazy. But it was just it just needed nurturing. It needed consistency. It needed, somebody to move it along and go, well, oh, who's it with? Oh, what did they have to do? They wanted to look it over? Well, here are these stats. Here's whatever it was. I handled it. It wasn't a lot of hours that went into it, but the consistency was incredible. And then once you have that deal, you get to point to them as your anchor customer and go on to others. And they go, well, if they trusted them with 14.8 million, I can trust them with that. That is how all growth comes. So whatever that stupid thing is, pick one thing and say, I'm going to do it every day, and make it so easy that it's only laziness if you don't do it. Don't make it skill. Don't make it. I've made that mistake a million times, choosing 16 things I'm going to change about my life. Do one. And it is incredible how, if you actually keep that consistency, you'll be blown away by the results. You'll be absolutely blown away.
For sure. Yeah. I think for like habit development is critical. And I tell my guys, it's like, look, if you do this process, right? Again, this is a research-backed process. This shit works, guys, right? Like if you do this and you change 2 or 3 things a year about yourself that never go back, that fundamentally change, you are like light years ahead, right? Like think of how many things you've thought about changing that never happened, right? If you could do 2 or 3 a year, you're like evolving at a rate that's unbelievably fast. So definitely a big fan of that.
I look back at big things in my life, joining the Marine Corps. What did I do? I told you I had to do the 20 dead hang pull-ups, and I needed to be able to run 3 miles in 18 minutes. So what did I do? I ran 3 miles every single day. I didn't time myself. I didn't do sprints one day. I didn't do 9 miles, and I did 3 miles every day. Everybody said, you're an idiot for that process. It will never work. It absolutely worked, right? I did it 7 days a week, and I'd be laying in bed. There were so many times I'd be like going to sleep, and I'd sit there and thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't run today. And I can remember one time I did that. It was pouring rain outside, and I was like, crap. Put my shoes on, got out there, did my 3-mile run. Pull-ups. I did the Armstrong pull-up program. Incredible program. It's 5 days a week, 7 days of push-ups every morning, but it takes longest days, maybe 25 minutes. Not a big commitment. That got me in my 20, right? I look at getting into Harvard, studying for the GMAT. I am not a brilliant guy. I just studied for it every single day. Every single day I had an hour that I did on studying. But it's those times of consistency. I don't say that I do it. And I actually, I force myself on the day you absolutely don't want to. I'd be coming home from work with that GMAT. I'd come home from work at around like 10 p.m. or something. I was still a Marine. And I'd get to my door, and my wife, we were newly married at that time, she would open up the door without me stepping into our apartment. She would hand me my backpack of study materials and a little food in Tupperware for dinner. And I would head back out to the library, and I'd go do my hour. I mean, that's what it takes. It's those hours that nobody else is watching. That's where your biggest wins are going to come from. When you are consistent in the shadows, that is where you change your life. And, it's not from talking about it. It's not from telling people that you did it. It's from doing it. It's amazing how easy it is once you unlock that one step.
And I think that's really brilliantly, eloquently said. The only thing I would add is like, don't wait for motivation, because I think like action and the things like the streaks, right, and habit tracking, like that creates motivation because winners want to win more. But don't wait to like feel like you're ready, right? Just like do the thing. And like you said, there's days that you're never going to want to do it, but learning how to do shit that you don't want to do is also an incredible superpower.
That's the thing about consistency is like, I think that people have it in their idea that it goes from, quality, again, weightlifting is just a great example on everything, but it's like, I've got to learn form first. I've got to do the perfect form so I don't get injured or, all these risks that I don't think are big risks. Then they're like, then I'm going to start doing volume. Then I'm going to do consistently because I'm so strong I can do it all the time. It is the exact opposite. It is get just that consistency first, then start adding volume. and then worry about quality. You'll fix it all up. As you're doing it, if you're doing bicep curls every day, you will start to go, what can I do to make this better? Oh, there's a little squeeze at the top. Okay, that does make sense. Yeah, I could do that. Oh, do it with this way. There are things that you'll learn. Let those come in later. Just start with consistency is king. It is absolutely incredible. And that's why, people think that I'm always being humble of saying that I don't know how to do anything, that I don't have any great skills. There's nothing you could put me in the Olympics for that I'd be a gold medalist. There's just not. But I do very mediocre things very consistently. And, by doing that in the aggregate over the course of years, it's turned into a lot of credentials. It's turned into a lot of money. It's turned into, a lot of exciting adventures. Consistency is just, it's incredible how much it changes your life.
Well, Mike, I really enjoyed this conversation. Looking forward to having you back on in the future. But in the meantime, if people want to learn more about you, if they want to get the book, if they want to follow you on social media, where can they find you online?
Yeah, officialmichaelleblanc.com is where I'm at. That'll have it, or just foundation.bot is my company. So if you want to see, we didn't talk cool killer robots, but if you want to look at them, there's lots going on that site too.
Nice. And we'll have the link to both those in the show notes. So listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate the conversation, Mike. And listeners, if you, as you know, right, Men's Therapy Podcast is part of Men's Therapy Online. Website is menstherapy.online. Come check us out. We have so many podcast episodes, so many blogs, and we're really trying to fill. We have a Slack group full of men that are talking about stuff like this every single day. We're up to about 400 guys right now. By the end of the year, we want to get to 1,000. So it's totally free, no charge, no commitment. It's a place to connect with other guys that all want to be better, that want to take responsibility for their lives. They want to impact the world in a positive place. So, it's really great to do this type of work in community. So check all that stuff out at menstherapy.online. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.